The night she told me to step aside, she was wearing a dress I had paid for, standing in a kitchen I had built with my own two hands, holding a glass of wine I had opened. And she meant every single word. Here is the thing nobody tells you about women like Madison Blake. They are not villains. They are products, meticulously manufactured by every glossy magazine and aspirational Instagram grid they ever consumed. And by the time you realize you are dating the product and not the person, the bill has already arrived. This is the story of how I let her walk out the door, how I made sure the door hit her exactly where it needed to, and how the sweetest revenge I ever tasted came in a paper cup from a mall coffee kiosk on a Tuesday morning. My name is Ethan Carter. I am 33 years old. I served 4 years in the Marine Corps. I have a scar on my forearm from a training accident in 29 Palms, and I build renewable energy infrastructure for a living. Wind farms, solar arrays, the kind of work that leaves calluses on your hands and something solid in your chest when you drive past it on the highway and know you put it there. I own a house in Denver that I framed myself, every beam level, every nail driven true, because I was raised by a man who said a house you did not build yourself was just a hotel you owned. I am not telling you this to brag. I am telling you this so you understand what kind of man was standing in that conference room in downtown Denver on a Thursday in March when a woman in a cream silk blouse walked into my life and immediately spilled coffee all over 12 hours of my engineering work. The conference was on renewable energy development, the kind of event where half the attendees are genuine engineers and half are venture capitalists who learned to say carbon footprint 3 weeks ago and now want a seat at the table. The coffee was in a ceramic mug, the blueprints were spread across a 6-foot folding table, and Madison Blake materialized beside me the way expensive things materialize in expensive places. Suddenly and with total confidence that the world would rearrange itself to accommodate her arrival. She did not just spill the coffee, she watched it happen, watched the dark stain bloom across my work. And then she looked at me with the expression of someone who expects the earth to apologize for existing beneath her feet. Most men in that room would have scrambled. Most men would have produced napkins, offered reassurances, maybe laughed too loudly to show they were cool about it. I did none of those things. I pulled a shop rag from my back pocket. I always carry one, a habit from the field, blotted what I could save, looked her directly in the eye and said quietly that it was fine. Not because I was playing a game, because it genuinely was fine. Blueprints can be redrawn, and because something about the way she was watching me, waiting for a reaction, made me want to give her the one thing she clearly was not expecting. Nothing. No performance, no damage control, just a man with a shop rag and somewhere else to be. She introduced herself. She had that voice women develop when they have spent years optimizing it for maximum social lubrication. Warm, slightly breathy, pitched just low enough to seem sophisticated. She said she was in brand consultancy, which in Los Angeles means you help companies look expensive on social media, and she was in Denver for a friend's thing, and she had ended up at this conference because the venue had good lighting. She actually said that. Good lighting. I laughed. Genuinely, because it was the most honest thing anyone had said to me all day. We talked for 40 minutes. She was sharper than the package suggested. She had opinions about urban development, a passing but real knowledge of solar subsidies, and a sense of humor that arrived in short, dry flashes before retreating behind the carefully constructed charm offensive. I asked her to dinner. She accepted without hesitation, which should have been my first clue. Women like Madison never hesitate, because hesitation implies the outcome is uncertain. And to her, the outcome was already written. She had spotted the watch on my wrist, the quality of my jacket, the confidence that does not come from money, but that money tends to follow. And she had made her calculation in the time it took the coffee to cool. We dated for 3 months before she started spending serious time in Denver. And those 3 months were, if I am being honest, genuinely good. She was funny when she forgot to perform. She had a laugh that was slightly too loud and completely real, and it was such a contrast to the curated version of herself that she maintained in public that I found myself working to earn it. We drove up into the Rockies on weekends, hiked trails she complained about but refused to quit, ate at diners she would never have photographed for Instagram. I saw something in there that was worth seeing. That is the cruelest part of the Madison Blake story. She was not entirely a fiction. There was a real woman in there, somewhere beneath the algorithm, and glimpsing her made everything that followed so much more infuriating. She moved in incrementally, the way certain species of mold establish themselves. First a bag for the weekend, then a drawer, then a closet, and then one day you come home and there is a ring of pink products around your bathroom sink that costs more than your monthly utilities, and there is a stranger's scented candle burning in the room where you used to read. She was not cruel about the takeover. She was sweet, actually, in the way a renovation contractor is sweet when they are about to tell you the original estimate was wrong by $40,000. She reframed everything as improvement, as elevation, as her gift to my obviously talented but aesthetically underdeveloped life. The furniture was the first serious battle. My house is furnished with pieces that will outlast me. A dining table I milled from a downed ponderosa pine, chairs my grandfather built, a leather sofa that has absorbed 10 years of good and bad evenings and wears all of them with dignity. Madison called it mountain man chic, which she did not mean as a compliment. She found a designer in the Cherry Creek neighborhood who specialized in what she described as elevated minimalism, which turned out to mean furniture that looked like it had been manufactured by a company that also made surgical equipment. Cold, white, and built to last approximately 18 months before the veneer started peeling. She wanted to replace everything. She had a mood board. The mood board included the word curated 7 times, which should be a felony. I told her no, calmly the way I say no to subcontractors who want to cut corners on load-bearing walls. She looked at me like I had suggested we eat dinner on the floor. Then she got quiet in that specific way that is louder than shouting, and we did not discuss it again for 2 weeks, at which point she brought it up as if we had never had the conversation, as if my no had simply expired while she was waiting. That was when I first understood that in Madison's operating system, a man's objection was not a final answer but an opening negotiation position. She was not disagreeing with me. She was just waiting for me to tire out. The financial erosion started with small things, the way all serious structural damage does. A hairline crack here, a soft spot there, nothing that sets off alarms by itself. $400 for a keratin treatment, $600 for shoes she needed for a specific event, a skincare routine that required its own dedicated shelf space, and a monthly investment roughly equivalent to a car payment. I noticed each expenditure. I did not say anything immediately because I was watching. I was gathering data the way I gather data on a project site, patiently, systematically, without tipping my hand about what conclusions I was drawing. What I was drawing was a map of a woman who had never in her life been told that money had a relationship with labor, that the number in a bank account was not a constant of nature, but the accumulated result of hours and decisions and sacrifice. Her father, Victor Blake, had built a logistics company from a single truck in 20 years of 18-hour days, and somewhere in the process of building it, he had made the catastrophic parenting error of shielding his daughter from the mechanism that generated the comfort she enjoyed. Her mother, Patricia, had done the rest of the damage, a woman who had spent Victor's capital attempting to purchase a social position in San Diego's upper middle tier, who had raised Madison on a steady diet of the conviction that a woman's currency was her appearance and a man's purpose was to fund it. By the time Madison was 20, she had been handed a worldview that would have been considered progressive in 1955, and that she had dressed up in contemporary language so thoroughly that she no longer recognized it for what it was. The clothing intervention arrived on a Tuesday. She materialized beside me while I was reviewing structural calculations at my kitchen table, set a paper bag in front of me with the energy of someone delivering a verdict, and informed me that engineers at my level did not wear Levi's. Inside the bag were trousers from an Italian brand whose name I am not going to dignify by repeating, which retailed for $1,200. She had bought them for me, with my card, which she had borrowed to pick up groceries 3 days earlier and not yet returned. I looked at the trousers, I looked at the receipt, I looked at her. Madison, I said, I have a pair of Levi's older than this relationship, and they have been on 3 continents and survived things that would destroy those pants in the first hour. That is exactly the problem, Ethan, she said with a patience she clearly found heroic. You are not in the field anymore. You are meeting investors. You are representing a certain level of return them, I said. The silence that followed was extraordinary in its density. She returned the pants. She did not return my card for another 4 days. And in those 4 days, $600 in charges appeared that she attributed to things I needed with the calm of someone reporting the weather. I paid every one of them without comment, logged every one of them in a spreadsheet I kept on an encrypted drive, and said nothing. The bank account request arrived on a Sunday morning in September, the kind of clear, cool Denver morning that makes you understand exactly why people choose to live here rather than somewhere easier. She was wearing my flannel shirt over silk pajamas, which was the closest she ever got to casual, and she was leaning against the kitchen counter with her coffee and her phone, and the phone, she said, had just shown her something alarming. Her accounts were frozen. A banking error, she believed, possibly connected to some issue with her father's taxes. The situation was temporary, she was sure, but in the meantime, could she be added to one of my accounts? Just for a few weeks, just as a practical matter, just so life could continue to function. She smelled like Chanel No. 5 and Sunday morning in the kind of feminine logic that has bankrupted men since currency was invented. I looked at her for a long moment. My mind was running calculations that had nothing to do with structural engineering. I knew what a frozen account looked like. I had seen actual banking errors, actual tax complications, and this was neither. This was a woman who had run her credit into the ground and needed a new runway. The specific detail about her father's taxes was a beautiful touch. It added a layer of bureaucratic plausibility that was almost impressive in its construction. I said yes. I said it easily, warmly even, the way you say yes to something when you have already decided exactly what the yes is going to cost the person asking. I added her to a secondary account, one I used for project incidentals, which at that moment contained just over $11,000. The previous day, I had transferred my primary savings, my investment accounts, and a portfolio that had taken 8 years to build to an offshore vehicle that my accountant had been recommending for 2 years. Madison had never asked a single question about my financial architecture because in her model, the details of the mechanism were beneath her interest. She consumed the output. She had no curiosity about the engine. I handed her the debit card for the secondary account with a smile that cost me nothing because I was not performing generosity. I was opening a trap, and the trap was baited with exactly enough money to be convincing and not $1 more. 3 weeks later, I was on a job site in the San Juan Mountains, 4,000 feet above cell service, running cable on a wind installation in 40-degree weather that reminded me why I do this work. Because it is real, because it is hard, because at the end of it, there is something standing in the world that was not there before. I came back to Signal on a Thursday evening and found 47 notifications from my banking app. I stood in the parking lot of a gas station outside Durango with mud on my boots and a cold I had been ignoring for 2 days, and I scrolled through them in the fading light. The villa rental was $2,800 for a single night in Santa Monica. The catering company specializing in raw bar service had billed $1,400. The limousine was $600. There were several charges at restaurants whose names I recognized from the kind of Los Angeles coverage that uses the words see and be seen without embarrassment. The total across 3 days was just over $6,000, which left the secondary account with approximately $5,000, which I quietly drained back to my primary the following morning via an internal transfer that Madison would have had no reason to monitor because Madison had never in her life monitored a financial account unless it was to check the balance before a purchase. I looked at her Instagram stories that night. She was in a white linen dress in what appeared to be a rooftop setting overlooking the Pacific, arms around 2 people I had never seen, one hand raised in a toast. The caption read, "Finally in my element." There was a small red heart emoji at the end. I took a screenshot for the spreadsheet, closed the app, and went to bed. The plan at this point was essentially complete. All I needed was for her to come home and say the thing I knew she was building toward. Because Madison Blake never left a production without a final scene, and she had been rehearsing this one for weeks. She came back to Denver 9 days later, which surprised me because I expected her to avoid the conversation. But Madison was not the kind of woman who avoided. She was the kind of woman who arrived. She arrived with 2 new suitcases I had not seen before and an agenda that she deployed over dinner with the systematic efficiency of someone who had spent 9 days in Los Angeles preparing her opening arguments. The apartment in Los Angeles was non-negotiable, she said. Not a rental, a purchase. She had been looking at units in Silver Lake and Los Feliz. There were some very reasonable options in the 800,000 range. And given my portfolio, she said, using a word that landed with a small chill because she had never previously demonstrated awareness that a portfolio was a thing I possessed, this was not an unreasonable ask. She needed a base in Los Angeles. Her career was there. Her people were there. She had been limiting herself by spending so much time in Denver, which was a lovely city in its own particular way, but was not, she needed me to understand, where someone at her stage of development could expect to thrive. I listened to all of it. I ate my dinner. I did not interrupt. When she finished, I told her I was not buying an apartment in Los Angeles. I said it without heat, without apology, the way I tell a client that a particular engineering approach will not work, not as an opinion, as a fact. She pivoted immediately to the dress. There was an event on Saturday. She needed a specific dress she had already identified. It was $900. It was important for her visibility. She would be photographed. It would generate opportunities. I said no to the dress. That was the moment she decided to deliver the line she had been carrying since Los Angeles. And I want to be precise about how she delivered it, because the delivery mattered. She did not shout it. She said it with a kind of elevated calm, the way a person says something they have decided is true and therefore beneath further discussion. She looked at me across the table I had built, in the kitchen I had built, in the house I had built, and she said, "Look at you, you are just a soldier in an expensive watch. You will never understand what real class actually means. If you cannot afford my lifestyle, step aside for someone who can." The room was very quiet after that. I finished my coffee, which was a dark roast from a small Colorado roaster I have ordered from for 6 years, because when you find something excellent, you do not switch it out for something trendier, and you do not apologize for the loyalty. I set the cup down. I looked at her. "You know what, Madison?" I said. "You are right. I have been standing in your light. I am stepping aside, but I want you to remember something. When you fall, and you will fall, gravity does not negotiate, and it does not care how good the lighting is." She thought she had won. You could see it recalibrate her posture in real time. The slight lift of the chin, the settling of the shoulders, the restoration of the composure that had slipped during the confrontation. She had won, she believed, because she had delivered her ultimatum and I had not fought it. She did not understand because she had never been in a situation where the person across from her had a plan, that what she had just experienced was not her victory, but the moment I had been waiting to trigger. The door closed behind her at 9:47 p.m. on a Wednesday. By 10:15, I had canceled every subscription attached to her name, the streaming services she used exclusively, the beauty box that arrived monthly and cost $180, in which she had signed up for using my email address as a backup, the parking app, the premium account on a social scheduling platform her brand work apparently required. By 10:30, I had called the BMW dealership and informed them that the vehicle leased under my company account and currently in the possession of one Madison Blake was to be recalled at their earliest convenience, as the authorized driver arrangement had been terminated. The woman on the phone was very professional about it. I left a 5-star review. The call to Victor Blake I saved for the morning because it required a clear head and because I wanted him to hear it the way I intended. Not as a grievance, not as an accusation, but as information delivered peer-to-peer from one man who took responsibility seriously to another. Victor Blake was not a man I had met, but I had done enough research to know him. Self-made, direct, the kind of man who started every morning at 4 and still had the handshake of someone who loaded trucks for a living. His daughter was a mystery to him. He bankrolled her without understanding her, which is a particular failure mode that very successful men fall into with daughters they adore and cannot read. He answered on the second ring. I told him my name. I told him I had been involved with his daughter. And I told him that I thought he should know some things about the financial picture she had constructed around their relationship, the debt she was carrying in amounts she had not disclosed to him, the obligations she had run up using my name as implied collateral, the full accounting of what the previous 6 months had actually cost and who had actually paid for them. I offered to email him the documentation. He said very quietly to send it. I sent him the PDF while we were still on the phone. I heard him open it. I heard the specific silence of a man reading numbers that reconfigure his understanding of a situation he thought he had managed. Son, he said after a long pause, I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything, sir, I said, but your daughter does, and I think that conversation is yours to have. He thanked me. He was a man of few words, and I respected that. We hung up, and I made coffee, and I sat at the table I had built and felt something I can only describe as the specific satisfaction of a project completed on time, under budget, and to specification. I should tell you about the dinner in Santa Monica, because it is the kind of story that would sell out a comedy club. I know about it because 3 people who were present told 3 other people, and eventually the version reached me through a mutual contact who works in the energy sector and spends enough time in Los Angeles to have friends who found the whole episode genuinely memorable for weeks. His name was Julian Marsh, 28, the kind of man who had made a significant amount of money in cryptocurrency between 2020 and 2022, and had since been coasting on the reputation of it while the actual money eroded in ways he did not fully track. He drove a leased McLaren. He posted inspirational quotes over photos of himself at exotic locations. He and Madison had met at some event in West Hollywood and recognized in each other the particular frequency of people who perform prosperity for audiences that are also performing prosperity, which in Los Angeles is basically the entire social ecosystem of anyone under 40 with a personal brand. She took him to a restaurant in Santa Monica that has the kind of wine list where the sommelier explains the bottle's emotional journey from vine to glass before you are permitted to order. She ordered a bottle of something that ran to $340 and an appetizer situation that added another $120 before the entrees even materialized. She was relaxed and expansive and magnetic because Madison Blake at a good restaurant with a captive audience was genuinely formidable to watch. And Julian was watching with the expression of a man who believed he was about to get something for which the dinner was the price of admission. The bill arrived at $850. The card she produced was the one from my secondary account, which contained at that point $41 and some change, the residual drift from an automated transfer I had not quite cleaned out. The terminal delivered its verdict with the impersonal cruelty only machines can achieve. Declined. Madison told the server there must be an error and tried again, with the specific confidence of someone who has always been able to outcharm a technical problem. The terminal was not charmed. Declined again. Julian excused himself to use the restroom. Julian did not return from the restroom. Because Julian had identified a rear exit that the restaurant presumably used for deliveries, and Julian's survival instincts, whatever else might be said about him, were sharp. He was in his McLaren and 3 blocks away before the server returned to Madison's table to inquire whether she would like to try a different method of payment, and the expression on her face when she realized she was entirely alone with an $850 bill and a sommelier who was now regarding her with the basilisk gaze of someone whose professional dignity had been insulted. That expression, I am told, was something people described for weeks afterward as genuinely worth the price of the dinner. She surrendered a watch. The watch was, of course, a gift I had given her for her birthday in April. A gold and steel piece from a Swiss manufacturer, not flashy but solidly valuable. The restaurant held it while she sorted out the payment situation. The situation took 4 days to fully resolve, during which time Victor Blake had already had his conversation with his daughter. The BMW had been retrieved by the dealership, and the apartment she had been staying at in West Hollywood, a sublet arranged through a friend who had extended professional courtesy on the assumption that Madison Blake's financial situation was as she presented it, had received a notice from that friend revoking the arrangement with 2 weeks' notice because the friend had also read something in an email chain that she should not have read but did, as people in Los Angeles social circles always eventually do. Victor Blake called me one more time, about 3 weeks after everything had settled. He was in San Diego. His daughter was living at home, working in his HR department, starting salary at the level of a recent college graduate, which is what she functionally was in terms of actual professional experience, regardless of the consulting work she had invoiced for over the previous 4 years. He told me she was angry, then humiliated, then something that he described with the careful language of a man navigating unfamiliar emotional terrain as possibly genuine remorse. He asked me if I had any desire to be compensated formally for the specific amount she had spent that could be documented as mine. I told him no. I told him the truth, which was that the money I had spent on Madison Blake was money I had decided to spend, and I had spent it with full awareness of what it was buying me. Information, specifically, about exactly who she was and what she was capable of. And that information had turned out to be worth every dollar of its cost. I told him his daughter was not a bad person. She was a person who had been handed a broken map and had been navigating by it with complete sincerity, which is its own kind of tragedy. I said I hoped the job worked out. I said I meant that genuinely. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that surprised me. He said his wife, Patricia, had stopped speaking to him when he had presented Madison with the terms of her return home, and that he was beginning to understand that the problem with his daughter was older and more architectural than he had wanted to admit, and that he was not entirely certain how to proceed. He did not ask for advice, he was just talking, the way men talk when they have run out of people they trust and find themselves unexpectedly on the phone with someone who has no reason to lie to them. I listened. We hung up. I have not spoken to Victor Blake since, and I think that is the correct resolution for everyone involved. 6 months after Madison Blake walked out of my house in Denver, I was in a shopping mall in the south part of the city on a Tuesday morning in March, buying a bag of coffee from a roaster who had a kiosk near the food court. The Harley was in the parking lot, a new Road King, black with chrome, which I had bought with money I had set aside specifically for it because I had wanted one for 12 years and had kept deferring the purchase for reasons that, post-Madison, seemed completely incoherent to me. The morning was cold and clear. I was wearing the Levi's she had found embarrassing and a jacket I had owned for 7 years and which still fit perfectly because I keep myself in the same physical condition I maintained in the core, not because of vanity, but because the alternative is accepting decline, and I am constitutionally disinterested in decline. I paid for the coffee. I turned around. She was standing at a cosmetics counter approximately 30 feet away, in a uniform that was the retail equivalent of beige, not quite a smock, but not far from one, with her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, the kind of ponytail that is not a style choice, but a concession to an 8-hour shift. She was explaining the difference between two foundation shades to a woman who was not listening particularly carefully, using the same voice she used to use when she was performing knowledge. The warm, authoritative cadence of a woman who has memorized the product information and is delivering it on autopilot, while the rest of her brain is occupied elsewhere. She saw me. I know because her body changed the way a body changes when a specific kind of recognition arrives. Not fear exactly, not pleasure exactly, but the specific voltage of an encounter you have been dreading and constructing simultaneously. The moment you have imagined dozens of times lying awake at 2 in the morning that has now materialized in a shopping mall on a Tuesday in unflattering retail lighting, while you are wearing a company uniform and your hair is in a ponytail and the man across the room looks rested and free and slightly better than you remembered him being. She waited to see what I would do. She had a script ready, I could tell. The defensive architecture was visible in the set of her jaw, the way she had already positioned herself slightly sideways in case she needed to turn away first, denying me the satisfaction of being the one who walked away. She expected something from me, recognition, acknowledgement, possibly condescension, possibly a smirk that she could store and nurse into a grievance that would sustain her for months. I did not give her any of it. Not because I was being strategic. The time for strategy was 6 months in the past. The game was over. The score was final. I looked in her direction the way you look at a section of pipe on a job site that you know is not the right diameter for the application. A brief, automatic assessment followed by zero additional attention because there is nothing useful to be done with a component that does not fit the system. I picked up my coffee. I walked to the exit. I put on my helmet in the parking lot, the cold March air hitting the back of my neck with that particular bite that Denver mornings specialize in. And I started the Harley and rode north toward the mountains because I had a site visit at 10 and a meeting at 2 and a life that was running precisely the way a well-maintained machine runs, efficiently, reliably, and with absolutely no unnecessary drag. I did not look back. Not because looking back would have been painful. It would not have been. Because looking back would have required me to believe the scene behind me was worth one additional second of my attention, and it was not. The Harley took a curve on the on-ramp at 45 miles an hour, the engine doing that thing it does that sounds like the word forward, and the mall and the cosmetics counter and the woman in the ponytail were already in a different chapter of a book I had finished reading and set down. People ask me sometimes what the lesson is. They want me to say something about how you have to know your worth, or how a real woman would never, or how love makes you blind. I don't have a lesson. I have an experience, and the experience is this. I met a woman who had been raised to believe that her value was a transaction, and a man's purpose was to be the other side of that transaction. And I participated in the relationship with full awareness of what it was, and I ended it on my terms, and I walked away intact. My finances were intact. My house was intact. My sense of myself was intact. The only thing I lost was a woman who was never really mine to begin with, because you cannot lose something that was always holding itself in reserve, always calculating the angle, always measuring you against the fantasy of someone richer or more compliant who was perpetually arriving just over the horizon. Madison Blake is working a cosmetics counter in a Denver mall because her father is a man who spent 30 years learning that labor is dignity and decided finally to teach his daughter the same lesson. I cannot speak to whether she is learning it. I genuinely hope she is. Not because I am generous, I am not always generous, but because the alternative, a woman at 40, still running the same playbook, still measuring men against a spreadsheet she has never shown them, still waiting for the investment portfolio, with legs to walk through the door and fund the production of herself. That alternative is genuinely sad, and I have no interest in seeing it unfold. My lifestyle is mine. I built it. I maintain it. I can look at every part of it and tell you exactly what it cost and what I did to earn it, and that accounting squares every single time. There is no price tag on it because it is not for sale and never was. She looked at me and saw a client. She should have looked more carefully. The most expensive thing in my house was never the watch. It was the man wearing it.